Hello and welcome to interest.co.nz. I'm Gareth Vaughan with another of our double shot interviews. This one is a Skype interview with David Cay Johnston, an American investigative journalist and Pulitzer Prize winner who's recently published a book called The Making of Donald Trump. David has spent 28 years writing about and investigating Donald Trump and his business affairs, so has a vast amount of knowledge into the sort of person the President-elect of the United States really is. So David, you first met Donald Trump in Atlantic City back in June 1988. Now, if someone had told you at that time that Trump would one day be the President of the United States, what would your reaction have been?
Oh, I would have found that absurd and beyond belief. If someone had said he's going to become a household name, wouldn't have surprised me at all. But President of the United States, back then, not a chance.
So has it actually sunk into you now that he's President-elect? Can you believe it?
Oh, sure. Well, I had said up until a couple of days before the election that he might win. It wasn't likely, but he might win. It would depend on the voter turnout. And then about a week before the election, or 4 days, the Trump people themselves started signaling, journalists that they did not expect to win. And they were going around on election day, the staff, making nice with journalists. And so I said at the very end there, he's not going to win because the Trump people themselves suggested he wasn't going to win. I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I'd stuck with he might win, depends on the turnout.
So I mean, you've investigated Donald Trump's life and business for 28 years or so. What sort of person have we got as President-elect of the United States?
Well, we have a man with a history of erratic behavior, which we saw on display when he was tweeting in the middle of the night about the weight of a Miss Universe from 2 decades ago, when in one of the debates, when he appeared to be exhausted, he went off, forgot the question, and went into a rant about a middling comedic actress, Rosie O'Donnell, over something she had said on daytime television. Matters nobody cares about, except Donald Trump. Donald was shipped off to a military academy by his father when he was 13 years old because he was a troublemaker. Back in the day, you were called maladjusted. He has said the junior classmen were brutalized at that school, and other people have said that. And so Donald Trump, something happened to him at that time because emotionally he is essentially a 13-year-old boy. The way he talks about women, the way he talks about himself, he talks like a 13-year-old boy who's struggling with puberty. He is not, by any stretch of the imagination, as wealthy as he claims. There is not now, and never has been, any verifiable evidence that he's worth even $1 billion. He's a wealthy man. That's beyond dispute. And that's important because Donald Trump exaggerates all the time. He says Trump Tower is 68 stories high. It's 58 stories. In fact, I got my former newspaper, the New York Times, after I complained to stop talking about him having a 68-story building. He put out all sorts of false stories about all sorts of things over the years because he has this desperate need to exaggerate as well as to win.
Indeed, your book paints a picture of I guess to put it politely, an ethically and morally challenged person who's very dishonest, which during the campaign we saw a lot of evidence of lying. His campaign was very divisive. The whole election was divisive. But then yet on election night, we saw a very conciliatory speech from Donald Trump, and he appeared, at least publicly, to have had a cordial meeting with President Obama. Is there any chance that a new, nicer, more inclusive version of Donald Trump's going to emerge, a presidential Trump, now that he's actually going to be president?
No. The speech you saw on the night that he won, this magnanimous speech, is what even a con artist like Donald Trump will do when he's gotten what he's seeking. And he was surprised that night. There's no question, looking at him and the family, they were surprised by this. But then he started appointing people to government positions. And right out of the box, he selects Steve Bannon to be his chief strategist. Steve Bannon is a very wealthy financier, a very smart guy. He's also the chairman of a website that runs crazy conspiracy theories Paul Ryan, Republican speaker, double agent for Hillary Clinton, and vicious stories about black Americans. And he himself, according to court records, is an anti-Semite. He's selected a general who thinks that the jihadists are as big a threat, essentially, as the Russians, the Soviets during the Cold War. He's appointed as Attorney General, at least offered the Attorney Generalship to a U.S. Senator who was so much a racist that he was denied a federal judgeship 30 years ago. He's going to appoint a divisive cabinet. He's going to appoint people who are going to pursue Donald's policies. Donald is a racist. He's a misogynist. He's not a homophobe. He is not an anti-Semite, although there are some things on his website that have raised questions about that. At least in my experience, he's not. And he's going to appoint people he's comfortable with, and his overriding demand will be absolute fealty to him. That is his position in everything in life. You know, if you're around him, absolute fealty and loyalty. And if not, well, his job in life is to make your life miserable.
Now, just to be clear, I mean, my understanding is you yourself are a registered Republican, aren't you? So it's not as if you're coming from this as a hardcore Hillary Clinton supporter or even a Democrat.
Well, I'm not coming from any political perspective. I'm an investigative reporter. I have been chairman of the National Association of Investigative Reporters in America. I teach and lecture on 4 continents how to do reporting. I make a point out of the fact that I'm a registered Republican to simply, make the point that I'm not a political person. I'm a policy person. And I would have written about Hillary Clinton if I knew her. I've never talked to her. I've never met her. I wrote about her twice in my life 20 years ago, and she tried to get me fired at the New York Times over the 2 stories I wrote. Didn't dispute the facts, and indeed, my stories about how they paid more than twice as much federal income tax as the law required, the Clintons. They adopted my implicit tax advice the next year. But it's like, my coverage of the LAPD's worldwide spying and brutality, and the story that caused Jack Welch, the head of General Electric, to relinquish his retirement perks that I estimate were worth $70 million, and a lot of other things. That's my job.
Absolutely. Now, during the campaign, Trump got a lot of traction out of his labeling of Hillary Clinton as Crooked Hillary. Now, you've written obviously a lot about Trump and his many brushes with the law, and court cases where he's settled and the outcome's been sealed. You've written that the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, and New York State Attorney should initiate criminal investigations of Trump, his charitable foundation, and his personal tax returns. So how ironic did you find that labelling of Hillary Clinton? And do you think that the IRS or the New York State Attorney will actually investigate Trump now?
Well, Donald projects. It's a psychological condition. So when he says crooked Hillary, he's talking about himself. When he says lock her up, he's talking about himself. Donald has done this all his life, and he's well known for projecting. Voters don't get that, especially if journalists don't explain what's going on with him. And it's also totally outside the bounds of American politics to suggest that you should lock up and prosecute your political opponent. But Donald doesn't operate within the bounds of anything. He does whatever he pleases. I'm sorry, here in Berlin, I'm a little tired. What was the other part of the question?
Yeah, just whether you think that the IRS or New York State Attorney actually will investigate him.
I hope that they will. There's abundant grounds to do this. There are at least 9 illegal acts committed by the Donald J. Trump Foundation, which doesn't have any money from Donald Trump in it. It's clear that he's lied in the past when he said he would donate all of the royalties from his book, The Art of the Deal, and from Trump the Game, because the royalties from those are far less than the small amount of money that Donald Trump put into the foundation. And there are badges of fraud I have shown from court testimony. Nobody knew about it until I dug it out during the campaign. Donald's 1984 tax return. His longtime tax lawyer and CPA, in an appeals trial that Donald demanded be pursued, was shown the tax return. And on it, Trump had claimed a side business with no revenue and $600,000 of expenses. And Jack Mitnick looked at that under oath and said, That's my signature, but neither I nor my firm prepared that tax return, and the only one they could find was a photocopy. My first National Investigative Reporting Award won 40 years ago, Gareth, was for exposing a crooked lawmaker who used a photocopy machine to put his signature on somebody else's documents. And I suspect that's what happened here. Trump transferred the signature. If so, that's a crime.
In your book, you say that Trump is remarkably agile at doing as he chooses and getting away with it. You described him as a con man as well. I mean, is that how he pulls it off? Has he conned the American public, or enough of them at least, to vote for him to get elected?
Yeah, Donald conned the American public just as he did other people. Donald is a master salesman, and he is the best manipulator of the conventions of journalism I have ever seen. He's brilliant at finding journalists, like at the New York Post, who don't care about the facts, they care about getting a big story. And he tries to interfere with people like Wayne Barrett, the first journalist to get onto him. Me, I was the second. Neil Barsky, whom he managed to basically get forced out of his job at the Wall Street Journal, and others who actually, when Donald says something, check and cross-check and look up the record and write what actually happened. Trump, has cheated illegal immigrants he hired, and they were to be paid $4 an hour, and he cheated them out of that. He has refused to pay all sorts of vendors, resulting in people losing their jobs who worked for those vendors. He has been sued repeatedly by people who invested in Trump projects. And in one case, when people lost about $20 million because their deposits in a failed project, Trump testified, in essence, well, you should be happy. If we'd gone on with the project and it had failed, you would have lost $60 million. By the way, Trump got paid up front. He always does that. That's his standard business deal. He gets paid up front no matter what. Other people take the risk. He then sucks cash out of the enterprise just as fast as he can to move money out. Eventually, the enterprise weakens because, in essence, it has a parasite on the host. And then he abandons it and moves on. And so long as he can do another deal, then he's going to have plenty of revenue coming in. But he does not grow wealth. He doesn't manage businesses. And he actually has written that himself. I'm not an operator, he's written.
You've written, I think rather than in your book, it was in an article in one of the US newspapers recently about, or websites rather, about how Trump has profited off his campaign to be president. Do you expect he and his business interests will now profit out of his actual presidency?
This was not his goal in running. His goal was to win the biggest prize of all, because Donald was all about winning. But the arrangement that he has proposed is absurd. And yes, the family will make money, and it's a perfect scam for a criminal operation or for being pressured. If you're a foreign government, or you are one of the best friends of the king or the sheikh or the dictator who runs a country, you will be able to steer deals to him. Even Peter Schweitzer, who wrote Clinton Cash, a partisan book financed apparently by Steve Bannon, has said this poses really serious fundamental problems. Schweitzer noted on CNN the other day that real estate deals in the kind of countries Donald goes to are inherently political. They're not business deals. And Donald wants to have some of his children, perhaps all of them, to the grown children, to have national security clearances, but they're going to, in a blind trust, manage his businesses. This is not a stock portfolio. This isn't Exxon and General Electric shares. These are businesses in which Donald has a profit participation or a revenue participation or a royalty payment, and they involve countries all over the place in parts of the former Soviet Union, in Canada. The Russian oligarchs are all over the dealings with him, and we don't have any idea how deep and thorough those relationships are, except that we know they go back several decades, and they have been a major source of revenue to Trump. And in one particular case, were he a politician at the time it took place, everybody in the news business would have recognized this as a payoff. The value of a piece of land and the transaction was a payoff.
You've described Trump's vision as that of a dictator rather than of a president. What's your biggest fear from his presidency?
Well, when Donald said some months ago that he would fire generals, that brought up something I had decided I wasn't going to write about unless he got elected and unless he fired generals. But once he brought it up, I decided it needed to be written about. Donald does, in fact, talk about the president as if he is a dictator. He does not understand the duties, powers, and limits on the presidency. And if I had been one of the people asking questions in the debate, I would have said, Donald, you've been running for president since 1985. Please tell us where the job description for president can be found with precision. I don't want to. And then tell us what it is. He didn't know. He wouldn't be able to answer that. So he talks like a dictator, as if the U.S. president is an agent, like he is running his own enterprise, who does whatever he damn pleases. The classic sign that someone is going to take over and end a republic, go back and read your Roman history about this, comes when you fire generals whose allegiance is to country and you replace them with craven junior officers who, in return for promotion, will carry out the orders of the leader who their allegiance is to. And Donald Trump starts firing general officers. Everyone on the planet had better be very scared. Now, maybe that won't happen. And if it doesn't, that's great. I hope it doesn't. But if it does, that would be very troublesome.
So that's certainly something to keep an eye out for. And what about, I mean, you know, a high-profile critic such as yourself? I mean, do you have any fears personally?
This is what I do for a living. You know, I've personally hunted down a vicious black-on-white killer and confronted him and won freedom for an innocent man. I've run into a burning building. I've run toward 2 burning buildings. Policemen run towards gunfire. Firemen run towards fires. I run towards big, important stories that, but for my work, you wouldn't know the facts there. And if I am a high-profile person, which is probably the best protection I have if Donald decides to extract revenge. He can do subtle things, though, that the public wouldn't probably care about. He could put me on the no-fly list. Yeah, I get a short story in the New York Times that happens. He could have me body cavity searched every time I re-enter the country, like will happen momentarily because I'm in Berlin, Germany, promoting my book right now. There's not a lot I can do about that. But, you know, you do what you have to do. That's your job.
Now, I mean, obviously there's been a lot written about, and there'll be a lot more written about the actual election campaign. We know that there are a lot of people in America who are rightfully fed up with the establishment, with the system, the 2 main political parties, and obviously we saw Bernie Sanders got a lot of support on the Democrat side, Trump came through on the Republican side. Is Trump going to be a savior to these people?
No, and let me preface this. I've spent the last 22 years now documenting inequality and writing a trilogy of books and other things showing how government policies nobody knew about, that I dug out of the public record through a lot of hard work, quite literally take money out of the pockets of the vast majority of Americans and redistribute them to people like Donald Trump. Donald Trump's one of the biggest welfare kings in America. Now, the people who voted for Trump, even though I wrote my books so that anybody with a high school education can read them, they don't read policy books. They don't think about government policy. And Trump knows this, and Trump came along and did what demagogues do. He knew that people were hurting. The bottom 90% of Americans' income has been essentially flat for 50 years. That's a statistical measure, not individuals within that group. And Donald comes along and instead of saying, well, there's this government policy that takes money out of your pocket and funnels it to Warren Buffett, he says, well, it's the Mexicans, it's the Chinese, it's the Muslims, it's the black criminals, it's that idiot in the White House. And to many people, that's the level at which they understand things. He also, however, said, wages are too high. People were not paying attention to him. He has a long history of cheating workers, including executives. And so what we're seeing here is people are so desperate. And if you're in the bottom 90% of Americans, things are not good. The states have systematically rendered the safety net. In many states now, as a practical matter, most workers cannot get unemployment insurance if they're fired from their job. I've been talking to a journalist who was fired for doing her job She went on a new building, or rehabilitated building for a feature, went and checked and found that it didn't have an occupancy permit. It was a fire trap during the fire department, and she was fired for this and told by an editor, what are you doing? We need advertising. These people are buying ads. She can't get unemployment insurance for being honest and doing her job in the state she lives in. So people at the bottom, they're in fear. Their jobs are disappearing. The factories have gone away. They're not going to come back, by the way. When human beings first made steel, men pounded carbon into a red-hot iron, and it took man-years of work to create 1 ton of steel. Today, it takes less than 1 hour of labor to create a ton of steel. These factory jobs are not coming back. Trump promises that he's going to create booms in both natural gas and coal. Well, you can't have both. You can have one or the other, but you can't have a boom in both. And so the people who voted for Trump really were voting to blow up the system. Some of them understand he can't do what he said. They wanted to blow up the system and change it. And if that's true, in 4 years, we'll see something very different. Some of them, however, are true believers. Donald Trump is going to save us, and he cares about us. He doesn't care about those people. He doesn't care about anybody but Donald Trump, the genetically superior Donald Trump, whom we should all adore and worship and glory in. And if we don't, he has a word for us. Loser.
Charming, yes. Look, just on the international stage, just interested to get your thoughts on what he's going to be like. I mean, we've obviously heard from this distance that he doesn't like the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, the free trade deal. He doesn't believe in climate change. He tweeted one time that it was a Chinese conspiracy to harm the American economy or something to that effect. These are 2 particular deals of big interest here in New Zealand. I mean, what should we take him at his word on things like that? I mean, what sort of international statesman is he going to make?
Well, in the case of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that fits with Donald's view of the world. He doesn't have a sophisticated political understanding, but his superficial understanding of things. And I've been one of the leading critics of the PPP in America, but not for reasons to do with trade, but with protectionism for corporations. Now look what the Chinese have done with this. They've recognized that this is an opportunity for them. And they are out right now selling themselves with their diplomats to all the Pacific Rim countries. Hey, tilt away from Washington, tilt away from that country that elected that guy, and tilt towards us. Look at us. We're building the future. We are investing in our country. We did the Three Gorges Dam. We're building the Silk Road. We're the country of the future. And Trump doesn't get things like that. Those are way too sophisticated from my meetings with him where he couldn't follow various things, and other people have talked about this. On the climate side, I don't know if Donald is now a climate denier or not. Just as he used to be, it's a woman's right to choose, now he's anti-abortion. He used to be for a wealth tax, now he's for the biggest tax cut the wealthy in America would have ever seen, far bigger than George Bush's. Because Donald, being who he is, he has no moral core. He will tell you whatever he needs to tell you to get what he wants. So I don't know. I think one outcome of this may be, and I've been asked a lot about this in the last 3 days while I've been here in Germany, is that we may see the U.S. not be nearly as important. There's a lot of talk here about, will Angela Merkel become the leader of the free world? And Barack Obama spent 3 hours with Angela Merkel a couple of days ago. And for sure, that conversation was focused on Donald Trump, his relationship with the people around Vladimir Putin, and the ways in which Germany is particularly vulnerable to economic warfare by Vladimir Putin.
Certainly, we've got interesting times ahead, David. That was the key questions I wanted to ask you. So unless there's anything else that you really want to add.
Let me say the one thing that I really think is very important that was totally blacked out in America, other than my writings and some people at non-mainstream sites. Donald Trump has been in the embrace of criminals his whole life. His grandfather was a draft dodger from Germany who came to America and made a fortune running whorehouses. He was a pimp. And when he tried to go back to Germany, they threw him out. Donald's father had a business partner who was an associate with the Genovese and Gambino organized crime families. Donald has been involved with all sorts of criminals, Russian mobsters, mafiosa, con artists, but the most important one of all is a guy named Joe Wexelbaum. Joe Wexelbaum was a twice convicted felon. He's a mob associate when Donald decided to have him provide helicopters for his casinos. You have to have helicopters in Atlantic City in the casino business to bring in high rollers. And to manage his personal helicopter at the time called the Ivana. Very quickly after he was hired, about a year after he was hired, it turned out that Joe Wexelbaum had another business. He was a very major cocaine and marijuana trafficker involved with the Colombian cartels, and he moved drugs from Miami to Cincinnati, Ohio, in the middle of the country. When he's caught, he agrees to plead guilty, and he asks that his case be transferred to either Miami or New York City, the two places where he lives. Instead, and no one has ever been able to explain this, the case is moved to New Jersey, and it comes before federal judge Marianne Trump Berry, Donald's older sister. Now, 3 weeks later, she removes herself from the case, but in so doing, she had to tell the chief judge, you know, my husband, who's a lawyer for Donald's casinos, flies in this guy's helicopters all the time, and I fly in them all the time. You had a sitting federal judge routinely flying in a confessed drug trafficker's helicopters. If you're the chief judge, you really worry, boy, if the newspapers get onto that one, we're in deep trouble here. They kept it, by the way, out of the news for, I think it was 7 years, and then it didn't break in the newspapers, it broke in the book by Wayne Barrett. Donald, meanwhile, wrote a letter pleading for mercy for Joe Wexel. Diligent citizen, a credit to the community, shouldn't get much jail time. And when asked about this letter by law enforcement, he denied writing it. He lied and denied and covered up. They got a copy of the letter, they brought it to him, and the only thing they wrote in their report was he acknowledged it was his signature. Here's the question that should have been asked, and I don't know the answer to why would you write that letter? But the obvious question to ask is, you risked your casino license, your unbelievably lucrative casino license, to write that letter. You lied and covered up about it. Something strange went on here with the transfer of this before your sister, even momentarily. Were you investing in drug deals? Were you financing Joe Wexelbaum's drug deals? Nobody asks that question. If it's true that that's what happened, holy mackerel, is that important? And I do not understand the absolute failure of American journalists at my level, big national journalists, to raise this question. It's all public record. I mean, everything I've talked about with you is public record. The back of the book, there are 44 pages of references to documents and that you can check out. There's no unnamed sources or anything else. And it's not my opinion, by and large. It's mostly fact, with a little bit of analysis at the beginning and a little bit at the end. But given Donald's involvement with all of these criminal elements through his lifetime, this is something that needs to be thoroughly and completely explored. And there's a lot more, of course, about it in the book, about how deeply he was entrenched with this major cocaine trafficker.
Yes, no, there's certainly a lot of detail in your book on his relationship over decades with an assortment of criminals and mobsters, which is very interesting detail, and I guess it goes to the heart of the man's character and who we are actually dealing with here.
Right. And we are dealing fundamentally with someone who doesn't have a moral core. You exist only to glory in him or for him to use you as a foil. That Donald has no empathy for other people. He cut off health care for a sickly infant. His own grandnephew put his life in jeopardy over money. I mean, who does that? Puts it and his response was, well, I don't like people who sue my father's estate. The baby didn't sue his father's estate. And even if he did, you know, you got at least $100 million, and you know, you are so greedy that you'll risk a child's life so you can have more. The American public, however, they don't know these things. Even though my book was on the bestseller list, you know, we sold 50,000 copies in 4 weeks, maybe, in a country of 320 million people. And if there's no coverage by TV, by my former newspapers, the New York Times and the LA Times, by the Associated Press, then nobody knows this stuff. And this is a real failure of journalism and of the duty to watchdog and to ask the tough questions.
Just finally, one of the articles you wrote during the campaign was 21 questions for Donald Trump.
Right.
Have you had any of those questions answered?
No journalist ever asked any of the questions. Two of them were asked, one by Senator Marco Rubio and one by Senator Ted Cruz, just as their campaigns were collapsing. And none of those questions have been answered to this day. So just as I don't believe we will ever see Donald Trump's tax returns, I don't think we'll ever see answers to those questions unless he does something that then forces an impeachment proceeding. And then who knows what will happen. It depends on the charges and whether he fights them, etc.
Great. Thanks a lot, David. That was David Cay Johnston, an American investigative journalist and the author of a book called The Making of Donald Trump. And I'm Gareth Vaughan at interest.co.nz.